Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this new Connect University session dedicated to the recently published Broadband Investment Handbook. I am Rachele Civitariale, and I will be moderating this session. So just to start, a little background on the Connect University sessions in general. They are an initiative of DigiConnect and aim to update both the EU staff and the general public about the latest trends, digital trends, as well as the most important digital policies. Normally, all of you are connected via Slido today. Know that you can ask your questions there and that we will make sure to answer them at the end of this session in a Q&A, dedicated part. We'll also make sure to make the recording available as of next week on the Digital EU channel on YouTube and the slides on the Futurum platform as usual. Links will be added in the chat. Today, as you know, the authors of the handbook will be presenting the objectives, targets, and structure of the publication. Now, before we start with this presentation, I will quickly introduce the speakers. So today there will be three speakers. The first one, Guido Acchioni, Policy Officer at Unit B5 of DigiConnect, responsible for investment in high-capacity networks. Then we'll have Pietro Pantalissi, Case Handler at Unit C4 of DigiComp, responsible for state aid. He is one of the co-authors of the handbook. And finally, Marco Forzati, Broadband Expert at the BCO Support Facility, also a co-author and editor of the handbook. Now we'll start the presentation with the introduction by Mr. Guido Acchioni. Guido, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachele. We start with a bit of background about this handbook. The new version is based on a previous version published in 2015. So it builds on this document that was published in 2014 and was called the High-Speed Broadband Investment Guide. And it dealt with a similar set of topics, including the technology, business, investment models, but also EU policy and regulation, funding, and project planning, and information about funding, particularly from the sides at the time from regional and rural development policies. At the time, the handbook did not deal with the state aid issue, so the Commission issued a different handbook on the state aid aspects, was also published in 2014, and was focused on the previous version, the guidelines that were issued in 2013, and the handbook can still be found on the net, is the Handbook for Decision Makers, the Broadband State Aid Rules Explained. So both documents were at the basis of the interaction between the Commission and member states authorities, both at national and regional level. And further on in 2017, when the Broadband Competence Offices Network was set up, was also at the basis of a number of workshops and webinars that were put in place ever since 2017, and is still at the basis of a number of interaction between the Commission and member states authorities. Next slide. We now focus on the two authors and give you a background of who they are and why they were selected as the authors of this handbook. The first one is Marco Forzati. As background, is a scientist and technology expert. He's got experiences in the field of telecommunication. He's also played a role as a manager and entrepreneurs of a number of projects, and he's got a PhD in electrical engineering and a Bachelor of Science in Economics. He's carried out work for a couple of companies. One is Ericsson, where he played the role of consulting digital communication, but also at the time when we met with Marco, he was working for RISE Research Institute in Sweden. His main career also included his role as an independent consultant, and in that role he assisted a number of public authorities all across Europe in advising these authorities in terms of the planning, implementation and monitoring of broadband projects, and in the field of smart specialization. Let's move on to Pietro Pantalissi. The next slide, please. Pietro is a colleague. He works in DG Comp. He's been working there since 2015. He's in the unit that deals with communication media, and but he specializes in the field of information communication, specifically in the field of broadband. He holds a degree in telecommunication engineering. He's got also a master in business administration and a master in economics and enterprise management. His career also includes 16 years prior to entering the commission. He was working in Italy with a number of companies. One of them is Italtel. It's a leading multinational company that works in the field of system integration. It focuses on strategic planning and the business development. From 2021 to 2022 has been the main author of the new guidelines for state aid in the field of broadband. So he's the right man also to have had quite a role in the additional chapter that the handbook, the new handbook has, which is the aspect on state aid for broadband. And it's also been one of the main actors behind the new guidelines on the block exemption regulation that has been published also in 2023. So that's all about the authors and the background of this handbook. And now leave the floor to Rachele to continue with the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guido. Now we will just move on to the presentation of Pietro Pantalissi. So Pietro, leaving the floor to you again.
Thank you, Rachele. Thank you, Guido. So just a brief introduction from me, and then we will move to the substance, and I will discuss later on the stated aspect. So this handbook I will define as a collection of the relevant question and then a few answers. But what is important for us is in guiding public authority in how to plan, implement, and monitoring broadband project is really to provide for the right question that they should ask themselves when planning to deploy a broadband network. This book covers fixed network, irrespective if it is access network or backhaul networks, but does not cover mobile network. This is for the next version, let's say, of the book. And also take up of broadband services, typically called voucher for broadband services. Next slide. As Guido said, this handbook built on the high-speed broadband investment guide published in 2015, but many things accepted in this last 9 years. So there are substantial updates. In terms of technology, we move from the next generation access that at the time was meant as at least 30 megabit to very high capacity network. That means 1 gigabit for 1 gigabit network. And this is of course reflected also in the change in terms of policy. Back in 2015, we have a digital agenda for Europe that envisaged 30 megabit for all end user, all citizens and businesses by 2020. Now we have a digital decade policy target that envisages gigabit connectivity for all citizens and business by the end of this decade. And of course, rules and regulation is adapted accordingly. We have now a new chapter on broadband, a new broadband investment guideline that were updated at the end of 2022. and two amendments of a global block exemption regulation that describe, take into account the development in terms of technology policy, and describe how the Commission assess broadband project that require the involvement of state aid. And of course, financing is also evolved. So there are the typical funds that were already there in 2015, the European Regional Development Fund, Agricultural Fund. But as you know, we have new fund, the Connecting Euro Facility, Digital, and after the pandemic, we have a Recovery and Resilience facility that allocate 20% of the budget, a substantial budget, to digital project. Of course, also the budget allocated for loan by the European Investment Bank has increased, as well as the cooperation of European Investment Bank with the Commission through the guarantee provided by InvestEU. Next slide. So this is what we have updated in the handbook. Just let me now go through the chapter of the handbook, and then Marco will elaborate much more in detail than me. The first chapter is just about the key concept: what kind of broadband network, what are the quality of service criteria, fixed versus mobile. And then there is the second chapter is about the broadband plan. The broadband plan is a key element, as every plan start from assessing the current situation, then setting the goals that the public authority wanted to pursue with a broadband project, and then discuss all the elements that go from the assessment of the situation to the goal: which fund, what are the relevant stakeholders, what are the legal constraints, and so on. Next slide. After this preliminary assessment that is the broadband plan, then there are strategic choices. This choice is related to the role that the public authority wanted to have in the project. They may play a direct role in owning the network, managing and providing services to end user, or they may just provide the funding to operator to make projects that are not viable to become viable. This is the investment model and the key choice that the public authority should take. Then there is, of course, what they deploy. So what kind of network, which technology. They can decide to deploy just a passive infrastructure, or play also also the active network element, and then which segment of the network, of course, and which media. So it's now nobody is deploying a copper network, but for example, fiber is an important technology, sometimes combined with wireless technology for optimal outcome in terms of trade-off between investment and performance. And then what is the topology of a network that better fit current and future end user needs? So these are all important questions, key questions that must be addressed. Then there is, of course, the business model. What is the role that the new network will play on the market? Will be an wholesale-only network providing services only to other operators that in turn will provide services to end user? Or on top of that, the new network will also provide services to end user? This is, of course, a key question, and which has an impact on competition. Next slide. Then when the key choices are made, the project must be implemented. This means define the finding the financing, what are the, and we will describe in this chapter what is the way, the possibility in financing the project from European to national fund, loan provided by international organizations such as the European Investment Bank, but also by commercial bank, and why not by end users. Then there is an action plan. As every project, irrespective if it is carried out by a public authority or by a private entity, every project requires a business plan that must be properly designed with revenue, capex, and so on. And then the The actual implementation of the business plan must be monitored in order to adjust any possible issue that would arise during the execution of the project. And then the chapter on which I will elaborate later on, that is a peculiarity of projects that are financed with public funds, because there is a need to assess if this project involves state aid, if the compatibility with the treaty can be self-assessed by a member state, or if it requires a notification to the Commission, and in this case, it will be assessed on the basis of the broadband guideline. That's all on my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pietro. Now we will move on to the presentation of Marco Forzati. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachele. Thanks, Pietro, for the introduction. You can take the next slide. Thanks. So yes, these are the chapters that Pietro just gave an overview of, so we'll not go into much detail, but this picture describes a little bit how the handbook is structured and the philosophy behind it, meaning starting from the broadband plan and how this should be aligned with the goals and objectives of the regional or national development, and all the aspects that it should cover, setting sort of the general strategy of what we want to achieve in our broadband intervention. And then we go into the 4 strategic choices that Pietro just went through. And once the strategy, the plan is there, and once the important choices are made, then we need to actually deploy the network and execute the project. And there is a dedicated project on the action plan and execution. And this is basically a long list of all the pieces that need to fall into the right position and that can jeopardize the project if they fail, from monitoring to procurement to coordination, demand stimulation, stakeholder involvement, etc. All the things that really need to be on the checklist. And finally, the chapter on state aid, which is it's a dedicated chapter, but also because these issues really go into several dimensions of a broadband project, there are links to this chapter in all the chapters. What are the important state aid considerations in all of these choices and all of these parts? Next. So the introduction gives a little bit why we are writing this handbook. So the objective and the target audience, which is primarily public authorities that want to become involved in broadband development in their own territory. But the handbook can also be useful for other stakeholders that have an interest and have a role in broadband development, from civil society to corporations can draw some use from this handbook. Next. Yes, there is one section about what is broadband. There is sometimes confusion about broadband and internet and different services. So just to clarify a little bit, a broadband connection, which is what we are aiming to build here, is the channel over which we deliver a number of services. And internet is one of these services, but more and more so the main service over which applications are delivered. So these applications in many ways, in many cases now, are replacing digital services as so-called over-the-top services. So this section explains a little bit the implications of these digital services being locally delivered, and over-the-top services or applications, global services delivered over the internet, and the implications of this, and both from the competition and business point of view. Next. There is then a chapter about broadband connection classification. This is also to clarify a little bit, because the different, so you can take the next slide already. what is basic and NGA broadband is kind of maybe not controversial, but giving a definition of what we mean by ultra-fast broadband and fixed VHCN broadband. So this is, we are using the definitions by BEREC and the Commission, so it makes some clarity of what we mean here, and connecting to the digital decade goals. Next. There is then a section clarifying that this handbook is about fixed broadband. We don't cover mobile broadband, but of course there is a convergence going on for a long time now, and it's still ongoing. So fixed broadband can also be a tool to deliver mobile broadband. It's a backhauling network, but also vice versa, mobile networks can be used to deliver fixed access. So what we treat in the handbook is anything that is delivering broadband to a fixed location. That's how we define fixed broadband. So we do cover fixed wireless access, and that for us is a fixed broadband issue. We do not cover mobile phone, let's say, or mobile device broadband, maybe in the next version of the handbook. Next. Yes, there are many info boxes throughout the handbook trying to delve into specific topics or clarifying concepts in a schematic way. Info box number 1 is a good example. It just gives a definition of all the terms that are used and that sometimes are defined in a bit different ways. So we explain the concepts and define the terminology that we are using throughout the handbook. I'm not going to into the list here, but just to give you a hint of how the handbook is structured. And in general, so this presentation, I'm giving an overview of what the handbook includes and what concepts it covers, not so much delving into them. If there are any questions about the concepts themselves, of course, we can discuss them and go into more detail at the end of the presentation. Next. Yes, next again. Yes, so the next chapter is about the broadband plan. So first of all, there is a need of writing a national broadband plan, and everybody is aware of that, and all member states do have a national broadband plan. But regions also need to have some kind of strategy in place. So the first 2 sections discuss what it implies to write a national and a regional or local broadband plan. Yes, explains that having a broadband plan is also an enabling condition to get ERDF funding. There are some considerations on the socioeconomic benefits and challenges of broadband. Of course, the focus is often on benefits, but it's good to be aware also of potential challenges of building broadband networks. So there are some hints about that. And the importance of defining the policy context. The broadband plan should be part of a larger strategy and development plan for the territory. And yes, the importance of mapping the current situation and defining the goals, so that we are defining sort of the gap that we need to close by the intervention. And super important, identifying the stakeholders and securing collaboration with the key stakeholders. So these are all concepts that are kind of some of these concepts are sometimes perceived as nice to have, but they can really make or break the project. So the chapter highlights the importance of looking at all these aspects. And then, as I said, some general state aid considerations in this chapter. There are a number of info boxes here as well. Yeah, I'm going to different aspects, and one of them is about the broadband competence offices and the network that is gathering these offices both at national and regional level. Not everybody is aware of this network. Yes, next. So yes, then we go into the four choices, and again, Pietro already explained it. So what is the difference between investment and business model? The first chapter is the first of the choices is about what investment model we want to follow, meaning what kind of role do we want to take as public authority, and how do we want to involve the private actors in this. And this is specifically about the deployment, operation, and ownership of the network. So we can go into this first chapter. Next. So the chapter describes four models. And these are the direct investment model, the concession model, the operator subsidy model, and the community support model, also called bottom-up. And then it gives some considerations on different implications of choosing different models. Of course, there is no recipe here, but there are always pros and cons that are very, very dependent on the specific conditions of the project. And again, state aid considerations. So if you take the next one, I can give a brief overview. Yes, there is also an info box about co-investment and PPP, and I put a slide here because these are also concepts that are, or terms that are sometimes used differently in different concepts and by different people. What we mean here by co-investment is the situation in which two or more investors agree to invest together to deploy an infrastructure. And PPP is a special type of co-investment in which one of the parties is a public body. And this PPP can be done, for example, in connection with a direct investment model. I will give a hint of that in a minute, or in connection with a direct investment and concession model. So sometimes people use PPP to mean variations of these investment models, but the way we use the term here is simply saying that the project is driven in collaboration by a public and private actor in, let's say, in a equal manner, as opposed to the different models in which different actors, public and private, take different roles. We will see what I mean in a minute. Next. So the direct investment model has been very popular in the Nordics, especially in Sweden. And it's sometimes called the municipal network model because many of these networks have been deployed by municipalities. Keeping in mind that the municipalities in Sweden are much larger than places like France or Italy, so it's a different ball game. And in this case, the broadband network is built, operated, and owned by the public authority. And in some cases, this is done in collaboration with the market via a PPP. And this is still a direct investment model because the public authority really needs to become involved and, 100% in the definition, the deployment, and the operation of the network. This is very important. And the fact that this is done in collaboration with the market actor does not change the type of commitment and resources that need to be put into the project, but also the type of control that you have over the network. Sometimes this PPP collaboration is, for example, putting together different geographical parts of the territory in which there is maybe an existing network in some parts, and rather than building competing overlapping networks, there is a decision to build a network that combines public and private, publicly owned and privately owned parts of the network that becomes one network. Next is a concession model that is gaining a lot of interest during the past few years. In this case, the network is built and operated by a market actor, but it is owned by the public authority. So it's and the term concession here also means slightly different things in different jurisdictions. What we mean here by concession model is this concept that the network is owned by the public authority and it is built and operated by a market actor. The details of this can be different, and in some cases it does not classify as concession in the legal term, in the legal sense of the term in certain jurisdictions, but we mean this concept when we talk about concession model in the guide. Next. Next is the operator subsidy model. This has been basically the go-to model in the early days of broadband deployment, and it's still widely used, although it has left more space to alternative models in more recent years. In this case, it is quite straightforward. There is already an actor, typically a telecom operator, that owns a network, and there is some market failure. So there is a gap between what is available, what is possible on a commercial basis, and what is needed to be deployed. And then the public authority basically intervenes to support the telecom operator to build, operate, and own the extended network, or simply a new network. Of course, it can also be a new network, but typically this has been used to support existing operators to update and expand their existing network. So in this case, the public authority has a less direct involvement in the project. Of course, this implies different types of and the public authority and the regulator need to be more involved in ensuring competition, and that the deployment goes into the direction that is desired, of course. Next. Yes, a consideration about the operator subsidy from the state aid standpoint, and it's necessary to do this clarification because, as we said, we have a chapter about state aid that Pietro wrote, and Pietro is also the author of the state aid guidelines. So there is a very nice link, and it's very good that the two documents are aligned. There is one point in which the two documents don't align perfectly, and it's in the definition of the investment model. So in this handbook, we cut the cake into 4 models, and it's the 2 remaining models are operator subsidy and community support. The guidelines does a different cut, so the remaining models are defined as gap funding and in-kind support. And I want to spend just a few minutes to clarify this, why this is, and clarify what this difference is and why it is. So it was an aligned, let's say, decision to follow different ways of different definitions here. So the operator subsidy from the state aid standpoint means that a private actor receives support from the public authority to build or extend its own network. And this can be done either by means of a grant. Normally this corresponds to the gap, as I mentioned before, between the deployment costs and what is a reasonable profit. And this is why this is called gap funding. Or it can be done by means of equity loans and in-kind support with, for example, existing infrastructure or civil works, access to technical support and access to, as I said, to existing infrastructure. And this is called in-kind support. And because of the different nature in this aid, the broadband guidelines separate these two in 2 different models. But for us, what is important is that in this case, there is a private actor building their own network, and we are supporting them, or we, meaning the public authority, is supporting them. So that's why we put them in the same bag of operator subsidy. What is more interesting to differentiate from the perspective of a public authority becoming involved in the deployment of a broadband network is what kind of actor we are supporting. So next slide. We have the way we differentiate is between supporting a telecom operator, commercial actor, and supporting a project from the community. So the community support model again sees the situation in which the broadband network is built, operated, and owned by someone else than the public authority. But in this case, it's the end user community. And from the state aid perspective, this doesn't make much of a difference if it is a community, an association of citizens, or if it is a commercial operator. But from the, let's say, socioeconomic and business perspective, it does. So that's why we separate two models, and also what the actors building the network, what kind of support they need, and what kind of checks and balances need to be put in place are very different. So that's why we have two models, operator subsidy and community support model. I hope that this didn't create more confusion than it was supposed to remove. This is also called the bottom-up model, because very often, normally this is the initiative starts from the citizen, so bottom-up rather than top-down. Okay, next. Yes, this slide basically explains what I was trying to explain before in words. So from the point of view of state aid, the community support model is equivalent to the operator subsidy model. And that's why in the broadband guidelines classification, community support falls either within the gap funding or in the in-kind support model, depending on what kind of support we provide to the model, to the project. Next. Next, again, yeah, so the slide before was just that, yes, you can go back, please. So that the info boxes here are illustrating the different models with examples of projects that have been deployed during the recent years. There will be also a list of like a list of fact sheets that goes into more detail of practical projects and where the different dimensions are explained in practice in each project, but this is not ready yet, so it will be published a bit later. But in the body of the document, there are also these info boxes that are picking specific projects to illustrate specific concepts to clarify what we mean by the different definitions given in the main document. Next. So the next choice is what kind of infrastructure we want to deploy. Basically here, the question is, do we want to deploy fiber all the way, or do we want to complement with other types of infrastructure? And note that I use the word infrastructure here. From my point of view, it's very important to make a distinction between what is passive infrastructure and what is active infrastructure. So technology has to do with the active infrastructure. So the terminology that we use in the handbook is whenever we talk about technology, we are referring to the active equipment. When we talk about fiber versus antennas or copper, then we are talking about infrastructure. It's again just a matter of definition, but in the handbook, that's how we use these terms. So there is one section specifically illustrating this and making the definition of passive infrastructure one thing, active equipment, meaning technology, another thing. And why it is important to, I think you can take the next slide, Raquel. You can take the next slide again. Yes, and so this is what I showed in the beginning. So we are building a broadband connection here, which is the channel over which we deliver services and over-the-top services. But this broadband connection is actually made up of, if you click the next slide, is made up of a passive infrastructure, which is basically the medium over which the electromagnetic signals travel. And on top of that, the active equipment that is actually sending and receiving these signals and making sense of these signals. And why is it important to make a distinction here, not just to be nerdy about it, but there are some, you can click again, Raquel. There are some very Yes, stay here. Thank you. There are very important implications, both from the technical, but also from the business perspective. So while passive infrastructure is characterized by high capital expenditure, so very high upfront investments to deploy the to dig up the streets and the civil works and deploying the cables, etc., and relatively low operational expenditure. It's the opposite with the active infrastructure. The passive infrastructure is very long investment horizons. In the case of active equipment, typically we have a lifespan of maybe 5-7 years. The know-how required in passive infrastructure and active equipment is very different. You need deep ICT know-how for active equipment, not very much for passive infrastructure. Passive infrastructure is subject to regulation and not active equipment, and of course, passive infrastructure, once it's deployed, is there for a very long time, a permanent asset. So this implies that different actors will be differently placed to be successful in deploying and operating these types of infrastructures. That is why it is important to make this distinction. And very often it is the passive infrastructure that becomes the bottleneck. The infrastructure is not there, so we cannot install the equipment to deliver the services. Okay, you can go back now one slide. Then the other dimension that is defined here is, yes, more. Yes, the geographical parts. I don't know why 4.3 ended up before 4.1. I probably did the wrong in the. I probably made a mistake in the copy paste. But yes, definition of what we mean by access, backhaul, and backbone network, and the fact that very often access networks are what we are concentrating on, and that's also where it makes more sense to discuss about different technology and infrastructure choices. For backhaul networks, it's more straightforward. Yes, just to clarify these concepts. And then next, so you can skip until the next slide. Thank you. Yes, then we go into quite some detail about the different infrastructure types and what type of technologies can be deployed over that. And we identified 12 solutions. And by these solutions, we mean the combination of passive infrastructure and technology chosen over that. And there is a big table here. Of course, I'm not even going into any detail, but for those that need to understand a bit better what the implications of different choices are, there is quite a bit of information here, hopefully in a language that is accessible to everybody without having a technical background. I know that you are quite skeptical when you see all these numbers, but I think that at least we made a step towards making these accessible. If you click again, okay, there are basically 3 main choices here. One is fiber to the premises, fiber to the home, or fiber to the premises. So you use fiber all the way, or you could try to use the existing copper infrastructure and bring the fiber closer and closer to the end user, but still use the copper infrastructure. This is basically FTTC, FTTDB, which is fiber to the drop point. And there are different fundamental properties of these choices. So the technology can progress and be improved, but within what is physically possible. So this is also important to understand why it is important to know what are the implications when you choose to deploy one infrastructure versus another. Because yes, the technology does evolve, but it still has to run over the infrastructure that exists. It's like building a motorway or building a small road. You can have a more or less effective car, but the car will only be able to drive as fast as the road allows. And then the third group of solutions is FWA. So using for rural areas, which are becoming more and more the focus, because the remaining parts of the territory is not covered are more and more rural areas. And can we use, since the households and the premises are very widespread, can we use wireless technology to cover very distance households there? And so even here, there are considerations about physically what it implies and what kind of solutions are available today. There are also solutions 11 and 12 satellite, either geostationary, which are the ones that have been deployed for the past 30 years, or the new low Earth orbit solutions. The solutions number 12 is new. There was no mention in it in the previous version of the guide. Here there is a description of this solution and what kind of commercial actors or commercial solutions are becoming available. It's still a little bit early, so we don't go into a lot of detail, but I think that this will be something that will become more relevant in the near future. But the guide concentrates on these three groups of choices for now. Next. I think we can skip this. Next, yes. The next choice is the business model. And so in this chapter, again, we have four main choices or two groups of choices. Either we go for vertical integration or for wholesale only. And this choice, as opposed to the investment model, which defined how the public authority is involved in the project, this defines whether the entity that controls the infrastructure, whether this entity delivers services to the end users or not. So in the first case, it's a vertically integrated actor. In the second case, it's wholesale only. It means that it controls the network and it lets third-party actors deliver services, retail services to the end user. There are different ways in which this wholesale only can be implemented, and we identified three main ways. So that's why in total we have, again, four models. Four is the magic number here. You can click the next slide, Rachele. Yes, this is the illustration of it looks like 6 models here, but it's really 4. So we have the wholesale only models, and the 3 variations basically come from whether the network is open to third parties at the passive layer, meaning the entity controlling the network is giving access to dark fiber, and then the operators are delivering services, deploying their own equipment. So they are combined network providers and service providers. Or in a different version, the entity controlling the network is a combined passive infrastructure and network provider, meaning that they operate also the active equipment. And in this case, the service providers only interface to the network provider in a central location and deliver services like bitstream, sort of, and they don't need to deploy equipment in every node of the network. And then there is a third sort of a hybrid model. It's called the mediated version, in which there is the network, the owner, oh my God, sorry, the actor controlling the network still only controls the passive infrastructure, but the service providers again get access via bitstream, and this is made possible by a separate entity that only deploys the infrastructure. On the right-hand side, you see vertically integrated models in which, if there is public support, of course, there is network access obligation. So competitive operators, the vertically integrated operator is obliged to give access to competitors, but the business situation is different. We have third parties actors competing with the actor that owns and controls the network. So it still is considered vertically integrated operator. It can be open at passive and or active layer. Next. Yes, there is then a table that tries to illustrate how investment model and business models can be combined. Some combinations are not really relevant, and there are not many examples or no examples at all. And there is a section that tries to explain how, in practice, these different combinations work and what kind of roles public and private actors are taking. I'm not going into the detail here, but we try to clarify really what we mean by investment model and business model and how they can be combined. And then in the info boxes, we try to illustrate examples of this. Next. Yes, the final choice is financing tools. How do we finance the project? And there are different tools listed here. The go-to tool often is grant financing, and of course it's very attractive because it's free money in a way. But as you know, there is no free meals, so that has implications, and also the resources are limited. But the project really, what this chapter is trying to communicate is that the project should really look at the holistic picture of what type of resources are available for the project, which go very much beyond grant financing. So there are, apart from own resources that can be invested, that sometimes maybe are overlooked, and this can be in terms of existing infrastructure or competencies, or synergies with other infrastructures being built that are often overlooked. Now there has been a lot of focus on trying to get projects to take advantage of collaboration with other infrastructure. The Commission has pushed a lot for that, but still there is a need to work more on that. But also debt financing and equity financing are tools that are not used very much. So simply getting loans or involving investors in the project is something that can take the project to a different level. And here it's not really choosing one or the other. It's very often combining different tools, and often this leads to a sort of mutual reinforcement. One source of financing makes it easier to access another type. So really, how do we combine the financing portfolio? You can click to the next slide, Rachele. I thought I had a table. Yeah, you can go back for a minute. So of course there are different actors that can provide the different types of tools, and approaching actors from the European Commission to local funds to investors and banks and venture capitalists needs different approaches and needs different competencies. But really bringing together as much as a diverse pool of finances as possible can make the project fly when just one source will not. Next, as I said, action plan and execution. This, as I said, is really a list of all the important pieces that need to be there, and they need to be defined in a plan, and a well-defined and written plan, and that can be executed and assessed. So from cost estimates, risk assessment and management, procurement, of course, super important, monitoring, the identification of potential customers. So here, not only the let's say the actors that we are building the network for, meaning our end users, but also potential businesses and even other operators that can use the network for their own purposes and become a good source of financing, again, to provide to strengthen the business case. And establishing internal and external coordination and collaboration is also very important. Regarding the broadband champion, this is especially in local projects can be very, very important. So having enthusiastic people promoting and supporting the project can be key to success, especially in local projects. We need a marketing and communication plan to achieve this demand stimulation that we need to have, both to achieve the goals, because we are building the network to deliver services and to achieve the socioeconomic goals that we have, but also to give an economic sustainability to the project. If we are able to get a high percentage of people signing up to services early on, this will make the business case much easier. Yes, so I think I will end here. I will leave the word now to Pietro, who will explain and demystify the esoteric. Yes, okay. This sorry.
Maybe this last slide, if you.
Yeah, I can take this last slide. Basically, what is the difference between the broadband plan and the action plan? I think it's clear now from what I said. But the broadband plan sets the strategy. The action plan makes sure that the strategy is implemented, basically. Yes, Pietro, over to you now with the state date part.
Just if you don't mind, I want to remind the audience that they can ask their questions if they want and if they are connected via Slido, and we will make sure to answer them at the end of the session. So if they have any, they can put them there. Okay, Pietro, I leave the floor back to you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And the task ahead of me is quite difficult, demystifying state aid or making it accessible. But I will try my best. So first of all, let's go to what is the notion of state aid. Any use of public funds to support the development of an economic activity, and this is the case for the investment in broadband, must comply with state aid rules. And state aid rules as a foundation in the notion of aid that is described in Article 171 of the treaty. Any aid granted by member state, and I have underlined a key point that I will elaborate later. Aid granted by member state, meaning that there must be an imputability to the member state or through state resource in any form whatsoever, which distort or threaten to distort competition by favoring certain undertaking. Here there are two concepts. There must be an advantage and there must be selectivity, because we refer to certain undertakings, or the production of certain goods shall, insofar as it affects trade between member states, be incompatible, meaning that if there is no effect on trade, there is no aid involved. Now, from this definition, it seems basically that state aid always exists and is always forbidden. We are lucky because there are derogations for this article. In particular, in broadband, we use two derogations. Article 107.2.8 further clarify that aid having a social character can be compatible. We use this article as a legal basis for assessing broadband voucher with social character, meaning targeting certain individual in a specific fragile economic situation. And other article under 7.3c, that is aid to facilitate the development of certain economic activity or of certain economic area, where such aid does not adversely affect the trading condition to an extent contrary to the common interest. Here, the important aspect is a sort of balancing the benefit, the common interest, with the impact on trading and on competition. So when the Commission assessed the compatibility under this article, really carried out a balancing exercise. Next slide. Now, but a key question: why do we do state aid control? So why it is important? For two main reasons, and I would say that there are some additional positive side effects. First, we wanted to minimize distortion of competition. whenever public money is involved, some degree of distortion of competition is always present, but we need to minimize it. We need to prevent crowding out of existing investment or somehow disincentivizing private investor from investing because they see that there is a new competitor that use state aid as a tool to compete, ensuring a level playing field for all operators and preventing favoring certain technological platform, the famous technology neutrality principle. And of course, avoid that state aid contributed to create local monopolies because when a network can exist only if there is a public subsidy involved, of course, we cannot expect a second network materialize. There will be only one network, and this network must play a pro-competitive role, give access also to other operators through wholesale access obligation. The second pillar of state aid control is to ensure an efficient use of taxpayer money. What does it mean? That aid must be limited to what is really needed to reach the objective of the project, avoiding any overcompensation, limiting state aid where it is genuinely necessary, meaning the market failure area in which the project will never materialize without state aid. And then, of course, fostering competition for the market, meaning that the beneficiary must be selected through a tender procedure that minimizes the aid and result in the better possible project with the least possible public money involved. These are the two pillars, but as I said, there are a positive side effect that proper state aid control ensure competitiveness of a European industry, because somehow this industry would not be doped by public money and prevents a subsidy race. You can imagine that we want a single market, and without a proper state aid control, there may be the tendency of member states to subsidize to favor the national champion, the national industry, and this will destroy the single market. So it's an important element, even if it's not in the two primary objectives of state aid control. Next slide. Now, if state aid control is important, if it has a lot of benefit, implementing state aid control is somehow perceived as a difficult task from member state public authority. So first of all, we have said that whenever public funds is involved, usually this also qualify as state aid, and the notification to the Commission may be necessary to assess the compatibility with the treaty, and this notification can be sent to the Commission before granting the aid. That means basically before tendering out the project. But there are also situations in which first, state aid do not exist, even if public financing is involved, or where the state aid exists, but the compatibility with the treaty can be self-assessed by member state. And this is for all the projects that fall within the general block exemption regulation. Next slide. There are various cases in which state aid is not involved. And this is for sure a non-exhaustive list, but the main element is when the public finance is allocated at EU level rather than at national level. First, because there is no imputability to member state. As I said before, the imputability is at European level. But more importantly, in substance, is because the consistency with state aid rules is verified at EU level when the fund is designed, and is not needed a further check at national level and then at European level. Then there are administrative and regulatory measures. These include facilitating rights of way, coordinating civil engineer work, and so on. and the sharing of infrastructure under the condition that they are transparent and non-discriminatory for all interested operator, and they are open to all potential users. This is the element of selectivity that I described before in the definition of aid. Then there is the famous market economy operator principle. Not always when the state acts on the market, it is not acting as a normal player. Sometimes it does. And if a state acts as a normal player on the market, sharing the same risk and opportunity as a private investor, then there is no aid involved. This, of course, requires quite an extensive demonstration, an ex-ante business plan, well-designed, and in case there is a partnership with a private operator, that this investment is a sort is done on pari passu, meaning that they share exactly the same condition, risk, benefit, and possibly also they take the same share in the company in which they invest. Then there is the famous service of general economic interest if complemented by the four Altmark conditions that ensure that there is no aid. The first condition is when the public service obligation must be clearly defined by an entrustment act in advance. The parameter for compensation must be established in advance. No overcompensation, meaning that the compensation can only cover the net cost, meaning cost minus revenue plus a reasonable profit. And this you would say, well, pretty obvious. Then there is the fourth condition, that the compensation must be established either through a tender or by comparison with the cost of a typical well-run company. And in case there is no tender, of course, identifying what are the costs of a typical well-run company is not straightforward. But in this case, there will be no advantage. And again, going back to the definition of aid, this will not qualify as aid. And finally, as I said before, if there is no impact on trade, then there is no aid. And of course, for certain projects that have an amount that is particularly low, it can be assumed that there is no cross-border competition that is affected. This threshold is the de minimis threshold, that is 300,000 euros for all the project, and that increased to 750,000 euros for service of general economic interest. So in this case, there is no state aid involved, and public authority can proceed without any further engagement with the Commission or any other activity. Next slide. But of course, there are situations in which state aid is clearly involved because it does not fall within the previous category, but still this project may fall within the global block exemption regulation. These are the measures that fall within this. The GBER are measures that are considered as not having a significant distorting impact on competition, for example, because the budget is limited, and for which member state can carry out a self-assessment of the compatibility because somehow they are not particularly complex. So we can trust that the member state, there is enough case practice and they can carry out this assessment by themselves. As I said in the introduction, GBER has been amended quite recently, a couple of times. The last version is called the Green Deal GBER, and it has broadened the type of project that can be covered by GBER. In particular, Article 52 covers aid for fixed access network up to an amount, a budget of 100 million euros, and the intervention can take place where there is no existing or planned network that can provide more than 100 megabit, or even in case of socioeconomic driver, meaning school, university, hospital, and so on. This threshold for intervention can be increased to 300 megabit. Now, of course, there are many requirements, and some of them I will describe when I will talk about the broadband guideline. But the key requirements are, first, we need to define the area of intervention, and this is done through mapping and public consultation. Mapping assess what are the performance of a network that exists or are planned in the intervention area. The public consultation verify the mapping. There may be operator that say, okay, but my future investment plan were not properly taken into account. Now I am submitting them, but also consult the market on the main characteristic of the project, and this results in the possibility to improve the project. Of course, the new network must provide enhanced characteristic, enhanced performance in comparison with a network that already exists. This is the famous step change. There must be a tender to minimize the aid involved to select the beneficiary. There must be active and passive wholesale access to make this network available to other operator, must be technologically neutral, and of course, as every project, it must be monitoring, there must be accounting separation, and in case there is overcompensation, this must be clawed back to the state. Now, let me just skip Article 52C to go directly to Article 52D. This is a novelty in the last version of the GBER. We have now not only fixed access network, but also backhaul network. Here, the threshold for intervention in terms of budget is the same, is 100 million euros, and the condition to intervene is the intervention area. There is no backhaul network based on fiber. Then for the rest, the requirements are substantially the same that I have just described for fixed access network. For what concerns connectivity voucher, this is also a novelty in the last version of the GBER. Connectivity voucher are the typical broadband voucher, so it's not dedicated to a certain category of end user, that is for social voucher and cannot be covered by GBER. In this case, the threshold is 50 million euros over 2 years, and it can be used to move from below 30 megabit to above 30 megabit, or from below 100 megabit to above 100 megabit if these broadband vouchers are for small and medium enterprise. I will not enter into the detail of the requirement, but they can cover up to 50% of eligible costs, where the eligible costs are the setup cost, but also the monthly fee or the subscription, and the maximum duration must be limited to 3 years in order not to make this as a substantial element of the market, but really contribute to boost the adoption of broadband in a certain period of time. Next slide. Now, if nothing works, meaning eventually public authority has considered that there is aid, the self-assessment doesn't work, then the project must be notified to the Commission for assessment of compatibility with the treaty. Now, this assessment is carried out on the basis of the broadband guidelines. The broadband guidelines has been revised at the end of 2022 and now include quite an extensive case practice built on the extensive case practice that we have developed in the last few years. I will not describe in detail what is in the broadband guideline because otherwise I will not manage to make them accessible, but I would like to just describe the key element. First of all, the broadband guideline refer to how we assess the existence of a market failure. This means aligning with the new digital decade policy target when there is no network existing or planned providing 1 gigabit in download and 150 megabit upload. So if there is no network providing this, we consider that end user needs are not addressed, hence there is the possibility for the state to intervene. But then there are the need of intervention is a bit, the assessment of the need of intervention is a bit more sophisticated because we need to assess the likelihood that the market will address these needs And this depends on the level of competition in the area and the associated cost to deploy a network that will actually provide 1 gigabit. Now, the level of competition is assessed through mapping and public consultation, which categorize the area as white, where there is no ultra-fast network, meaning no network providing more than 100 megabit, gray, when there is only one network providing this speed, or black when there are 2 or more networks providing more than 100 megabit. Why this is important? Because, of course, competition is a positive force that push operator to address end user needs. The more there is competition in an area, the more is likely that this operator will actually make their network evolve towards providing 1 gigabit. But of course, competition is not the only force, because there may be competition. The operator may want to deploy this network, but the cost of deploying this network is also important. This is why one of the assessments that we do is what kind of network are present in black area and what is the gap in terms of the cost that is needed. To make it simple, if there are 2 networks already providing 100 megabit, but is based on old technology and the investment will be substantial, there may be a need for public money in order to make this network, or at least one of them, evolve toward providing 1 gigabit. Now, from what I just said, you have for sure realized how important it is to assess the situation that is currently present in the intervention area. And this is done through mapping and public consultation. Now, mapping is for sure a fundamental requirement. When we started revising the broadband guideline, we consulted the member state and stakeholder, and we asked what is the key requirement and where do you find the main difficulties? And the answer was mapping, because mapping means determining which are the parameters to map, meaning, of course, download, upload speed, but also latency and other parameters. And these depend on what are the end user needs that are currently not addressed. And then the question comes how to measure this parameter. For example, under peak time condition, this is mandated under the broadband guideline. But what are these conditions? What are the peak time conditions? They may refer to the contentious rate, to the number of users that simultaneously use this network. But what is this? And then decided on the level of granularity at address level on the basis of grid. How wide are these grid, 20 square meter, 100 square meter, and so on, based the broadband guideline mandate based on premises passed, meaning that they can be connected upon request by end user within 4 weeks. So it is a complex exercise, even if the objective is very clear and we can all share the importance of it. And then there is the public consultation, as I said. Verify the mapping, allow all stakeholders to signal issue in how the mapping was done and error in the mapping, and to allow member states to collect feedback from, on the intervention from stakeholders and likely improving the intervention. Next slide. Then, when this key element has been, the intervention area has been designed, then we have to discuss and the broadband guideline assess what kind of project member state and public authority actually intended to carry out. And then what is important to check if a new network actually provides a step change, meaning that it delivers significantly enhanced performance compared to the network that exists already in the intervention area. This means in practice tripling the download speed, at least. That the new network will provide adequate wholesale access at the passive and active level. This is essential to increase end user choice and competition in the area at retail level. And of course, access product vary depending on the level of competition in the area. So let's say when we intervene with public money, we influence competition. In an area in which the competition is already good because it's qualified as black, there are at least two operators already competing, it's important that the wholesale access obligation do not damage this competition, rather preserve the competition that already exists. In white and gray area, where this competition actually do not exist, we consider that a lower level of obligation is appropriate because it is linked to a reduced amount of cost to provide wholesale access product. And in fact, there is no competition to harm. So there is a balance to strike between the cost of providing wholesale access and the benefit of wholesale access. Of course, as every project must be monitored. And in case of a project with large budget of novel characteristics, there is also a tool that is the ex post evaluation, in which the Commission requires a report from the public authority implementing the project to assess the effectiveness of the project in delivering the objective that was somehow pursued on the project. And then, as I said, it's important that every project do not involve any overcompensation. But of course, at the level of design of the project, there is an estimation of what are the costs and what are the expected revenue. There is no certainty. So it is important that the project is monitored and every excess in subsidies is repaid back to the public authority. And this could occur because the network deployment costs are lower than initially expected, or the commercial exploitation of the network is particularly successful, and then it results in higher revenue than initially expected. So this is more or less in a couple of slides the assessment that the Commission carried out when a broadband project is submitted, is notified to the Commission. I think this is my last slide.
Yes, indeed, it was the last slide. So we can move on to the questions now, Pietro. Yes, you're done?
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing the presentation as it was the last one. Okay, so thank you very much. Once again, the audience has understood the assignment as we received quite a few questions. So I'll try to assign them to the right people. If it's not the right person, then just let me know and we move to another one. So I'll start with the first question. I think, Marco, this one is for you. So it says the guide is a great contribution to complete traditional networks deployment. However, a new model is emerging relying on a cloud edge computing. Would you agree that there is a need to extend the reflection or guidance to these new areas?
Yes, yes, it's true. It's an increasingly important. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Ah, okay, good. I could not hear. Yes, it's true. It's an increasingly important model, and a broadband infrastructure becomes key to enable that this model is deployed. So I would say that probably there would be a benefit to highlight these aspects more in the next version of the guide. Broadband being an enabler of these new models.
If I may complement what Marco just said, I think that the key requirement to consider when involving public financing is assessing whether there is a necessity of this public financing. This means determining if public funds are necessary because this ecosystem is required to address end user needs. And the private sector is enabled to meet these needs without public subsidies. So before considering any possible guidance, I think these are really, this is an assessment that must be carried out, and the market must be further understood in order to see what kind of assessment we can do.
Thank you both very much. Let's move on to the second question. Second question, sorry. I think again it's for you, Marco, but you're free to answer the both of you. So are any type of demand forecasting tools being used by the operators which take into consideration the various business models?
Well, I should not speak about I should not speak on behalf of operators, but I'm sure that they are taking into account the business model when they build their demand forecasting model, for sure, because it does have an impact.
Okay, great. Anybody wants to complement, or we're good like this? Yeah. Okay.
Well, perhaps from my side, there are certain models that are more susceptible to demand than others. For instance, on the wholesale only models, the contractor, whoever owns the infrastructure, doesn't have access to the final users. So they need to do quite an intensive investigation in advance to make sure that there is interest both from the final users and from the operators in order to make that that model a success. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Okay, moving on to the third question from the audience. So internet exchanges are a vital component of the internet for content and user experience. Can these principles be used to support new local internet exchanges?
Yes, I think the investment models and the financing tools listed here are probably they can be relevant also in the case there is a need to build a local internet exchange. Absolutely, especially when it entails civil works and premises and stuff. It can be seen as a sort of extra infrastructure for the broadband network.
Perfect. Anybody wants to complement, or we can move on to the fourth and last question of today?
Well, maybe just as a complement, I will repeat myself. So it is important. So basically, public funds can always be used where there is an identified market failure. So to the extent this internet exchange are needed and there is no private operator willing to invest for a variety of reasons, then public investment makes sense.
Thank you so much. Moving on to this last question, as I said, so the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive and the new Gigabit Infrastructure Act try to reduce costs for very high capacity network deployments, but need to comply with state aid. Are state aid conditions that may apply clear in this case?
Well, the Gigabit Infrastructure Act has a paragraph in which there is basically it is clarified that there is no contradiction with stated rules. In fact, I find that they work very well together, and I must admit that when we were drafting the broadband line, we had quite a few exchanges with a colleague that in parallel were working on the Gigabit Infrastructure Act. Now, if you consider the chapter of the broadband line that concerns the reuse of existing infrastructure, it's clear that we have the same objective. So we want both rules foster the reduction of the cost of deployment broadband network and the broadband, the Gigabit Infrastructure Act apply also where there is no involvement of state aid, but where there is involvement of state aid, then I would say that the relevant chapter of the broadband line is very much aligned to what the Gigabit Infrastructure Act fosters.
Great, thank you so much. So now is the time to thank everyone. So the speakers, technical team, my team here helping, the audience, everyone involved in the session. It was a great one, great participation, great questions. Thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone that there is a place on the Futurum platform where you can find all the Connect University sessions, so the upcoming events, the past events, where you can check the recordings or monitor if there are any further sessions you would be interested in. So make sure you check that platform if you want to participate to any further sessions. And voilà, for today we are done. Thank you so much again and have a nice afternoon. See you next time.